I'm Lindsey Smith, welcoming you to Raise the Line from Elsevier, an ongoing exploration about how to improve health and healthcare. To mark the 6th anniversary of Raise the Line, we're revisiting one of the most remarkable stories we've had the privilege of sharing over the last 575 episodes. And to do that, we're delighted to welcome back Dr. David Fajgenbaum, a physician scientist who discovered and repurposed a treatment that saved his own life from a rare disease. He chronicled his incredible journey in the national best-selling memoir, Chasing My Cure, now being adapted into a film. And he also gave a popular TED Talk about his work released last fall. When he first joined us in 2022, Dr. Fajgenbaum was just launching an organization called Elsevier, with the hope of replicating the success he achieved in his own case. I'm happy to say there is a lot of progress to report. In the last few years, Elsevier has advanced 14 repurposed treatments for multiple diseases, saving thousands of lives. And that focus on rare diseases connects directly to something we've been passionate about at Elsevier, the Year of the Zebra. In medicine, they're often taught, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. But rare diseases, while individually uncommon, collectively affect millions worldwide. To spotlight these conditions, Elsevier launched the Year of the Zebra back in 2023 and have continued throughout the years through monthly Osmosis-style videos, newsletters, a zebra-focused podcast series, and our I Am the Zebra, I Know a Zebra stories. And we're still working to elevate awareness, education, and support for the rare disease community, because those hoofbeats belong to extraordinary zebras like Dr. Fajgenbaum. I'm looking forward to finding out how Elsevier is achieving such remarkable results and what lies ahead in the quest to unlock the full potential of every drug to treat every disease it can. Welcome back to Raise the Line, Dr. Fajgenbaum.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited for this.
So before we jump in with questions, I want to set the stage for our listeners and tell your story a little bit and then hand it over to you. So you're 25 years old, you're dealing with Castleman's disease, and your body is essentially shutting down. The doctors are out of answers. There's no roadmap or treatment that can save you at that point. Instead of accepting that, you make the decision that if medicine didn't have the answer, you were going to find it yourself. And so you start diving into the science and researching your own disease and essentially becoming your own investigator. Can you take us through your journey for the listeners who might not be familiar with it?
Sure. Well, I think you set the stage so well. Only things I'd add at the very beginning was I was just totally terrified. This horrible disease that was literally killing me. My liver, my kidneys, and my bone marrow were shutting down. So I went from being totally healthy medical student. Third year, I wanted to become a doctor because my mom had died from cancer a few years before. And I was so happy to be making so much progress in her memory. And I loved the idea I could help people in ways that she wasn't able to be helped. And then I became so sick. And I ended up spending nearly 6 months hospitalized at the start. Most of that time in critical condition, had my last rites read to me because my doctors were sure that I wasn't going to survive. But then eventually got the diagnosis idiopathic multicenter Castleman's and got a lot of chemotherapy. And the chemotherapy wasn't made for Castleman's, but it sort of temporarily worked and it saved my life. But the fact that it did work was a game changer for me, because then I started thinking, well, if these chemotherapies that were made for multiple myeloma and lymphoma could treat my Castleman disease and save my life, I know it's not long-term, but maybe there's something else that could also treat my disease. Maybe there's another drug made for another disease. And so I went on this journey to try to find a drug that could save my life. And I had a number of additional relapses, but I did eventually discover a drug called sirolimus that's been around for 50 years that I thought might work. And I began testing it on myself. And now it's been over 12 years that I've been doing great on this medicine that was made for another disease. Lindsey, ever since that moment that it started saving my life, I haven't been able to stop thinking about how many more drugs are out there that could save more patients' lives.
Hearing you describe it in your own words brings home how high the stakes were in that moment. And out of that experience comes Elsevier. So for people who may be hearing about it for the first time, what is Elsevier and what problem are you trying to solve?
Yeah, Elsevier is a nonprofit organization that's on a mission to save lives by repurposing existing medicines. And the problem we're trying to solve is the tragedy that there are millions of people suffering and dying right now they could potentially benefit from drugs that already exist right now at their local pharmacy. The work just hasn't been done to make the connections between the drugs we have and the diseases that we suffer from. Or in some cases, the work has been done to make the connection, but us humans haven't done additional clinical trials, or we haven't done the work to raise awareness. And so people needlessly suffer when there's already a treatment that can help them. We are called every cure because we believe every single existing drug that could be a cure for someone should be a cure for someone. And sometimes when people hear every cure, they think we're saying that we'll cure every disease. And gosh, I wish we could cure every disease, but I don't think we can cure every disease with the drugs we have. What I do think is that everyone who could benefit from existing medicine should benefit from that medicine, and that it's a tragedy if someone dies while there's a drug in their local hospital that could help them. And so that's the problem we're trying to solve when we're utilizing artificial intelligence to scan all 4,000 drugs and all 18,000 diseases to find the best new uses for the medicines we already have.
That makes a lot of sense. So to put it into kind of plain terms, every cure is essentially opening up a part of medicine that's been hiding in plain sight for everyone.
That's exactly right. These 4,000 approved drugs, they're at your local CVS. Your doctor could write a prescription today. You could be on that medicine tomorrow. And yes, our medical system has done an incredible job to create those drugs. And yes, many pioneering doctors have tried some of those medicines in new ways. But unfortunately, these drugs have not been fully utilized. And a big reason why they haven't been fully utilized for every disease they can treat and every patient they can treat is because the financial incentives just aren't in place to do biomedical research on a drug that's already generic. 80% of our approved drugs are already generic. The other 20% will all be generic in the next 10 to 15 years. It just is what happens. Patents run out, drugs become generic, which means they no longer are profitable to a drug company to find a new use for that medicine. So as a result of our current system, most of the drugs we have are not even evaluated for new uses. And that's where we step in. Every Cure is a nonprofit to say, we don't care if it's profitable. Who cares? The drug's already been developed. It's already available. Let's do the work to find more uses for it.
That's incredible. I want to come back to the AI piece. So when AI is scanning for these possibilities, what kinds of data sources is it pulling from beyond traditional medical literature?
Yeah, we use biomedical knowledge graphs, which use medical literature like literature within the Elsevier world, but also use publicly available data sets that are available online, transcriptomic analyses, proteomic data that may have served as the underlying data for a particular publication. But that data, of course, there's so much more richness to it than just the one gene or the one protein that came out of it. So it also includes clinical trial data. It includes clinical features. Imagine every single biomedical concept being put into a two-dimensional space, every disease, gene, protein, symptom, pathway. And then imagine drawing a line between each one of those concepts and describing the relationships that exist between each of those. So interleukin 6 is increased in Castleman disease. There's a line between interleukin 6 and Castleman's, for example. And so you now map out what does the world know about all of human biology and all the relations between, what we know. And then you can start training machine learning algorithms on known treatments within that graph. We can say, this is everything we know. And within everything we know that sirolimus is a treatment for organ transplant rejection and for Castleman disease. But you train it on the things that you know, and then you ask that same machine learning model, now that you know what a treatment looks like, can you give us a score from 0 to 1 and predict whether every drug would or would not be able to treat every disease?
That's fascinating. So your team reviews around 1,000 drug disease combinations every month, which is a lot.
That's right.
How do you decide which ones are worth digging into further?
Yeah, this is probably one of the most challenging parts. Our AI platform is so good at giving us promising repurposing ideas that these amazing research fellows who go through the about 1,000 a month collectively, they have to make tough decisions about, do we prioritize lidocaine for breast cancer or losartan for pancreatic cancer or DFMO for Bachmann-Bepp syndrome? And imagine every drug and every disease is in there. So we don't start out by saying we want to find a drug for Castleman's or any disease. We say we want to find the best matches, just as you described, and we look through 1,000 of the best AI generated matches a month. But the principles that guide us in these decisions are that we want to pursue repurposing opportunities where there's strong biological rationale. It makes sense how that drug might work. We want to pursue opportunities where there's a major impact, which means in order for there to be a major impact, there has to be significant morbidity, mortality, and suffering in that disease already. And then the third piece is that it needs to be something that could be feasible for every cure to move forward. We're a nonprofit organization. We're not a big biotech company. So we can't do a $100 million clinical trial like a biotech could do. We can do a $3 million or $5 million clinical trial. So does this repurposing opportunity look like something that it could be amenable to a trial that's within our realm? And so when you add those things together, it's, how bad is the disease? How likely is it that the drug is going to work? And then can every cure move this forward?
Very interesting. So if I'm hearing you right, you're really focusing on those combinations that have the strongest chance for success, a real potential to impact patients, and a clear path to getting them quickly and efficiently going.
What you said is exactly right. And you can also imagine still how hard it is to decide between opportunities because, like I said, losartan for pancreatic cancer is horrible and losartan looks promising, but it is unclear how it's going to work and it could require a giant trial. So how does that compare to maybe a hyper rare disease where the biology looks really clear? And so our team wrestles with these things literally every single day. And it feels like the greatest honor in the world to be able to identify and search for these things without any limitations. Like a drug company has to worry about, does their drug work and what disease should their drug be used in? A disease organization like the Castleman's Network, which I founded 15 years ago, we have to find a drug for Castleman disease. We're not on the lookout for drugs for diseases. So for the first time ever, there's just an entity that's just looking for drugs for diseases that can make a difference and help people in a feasible and efficient way. And it feels like a dream to be able to be a part of this team, but it's still really tough.
It's such important work that you guys are doing at Every Cure, and you guys have already seen some incredible success stories. One that really captured the public attention was Joseph Coates, who was featured in the New York Times. Can you tell us what happened there?
Sure. So Joseph was suffering from a disease called Poem syndrome, which is a really horrible condition that occurs when people have plasma cell dyscrasia, very much like multiple myeloma. And it's very rare, and there are only a few treatments that are known to be used for it. I connected with Joseph because his doctor actually misdiagnosed him as having Castleman disease about 6 months before. And that actually, I think, sort of turned out being what ended up saving his life. So I knew him as a result of that. So when he was transferred to hospice care, when none of the Poem syndrome treatments were working for him, we recommended 3 drugs that are commonly used for multiple myeloma, which I mentioned at the very beginning is very similar to Poem syndrome. So it wasn't even that big of a stretch to go from Poem syndrome to myeloma. We recommended these 3 drugs for myeloma that the doctor had not considered. Joseph responded incredibly well. I mean, he went from being on a ventilator in the ICU. His doctors were going to take him off the ventilator on Monday, and they decided to try these medications, and it saved his life. And it's now been over 2 years that him and his girlfriend, Tara, have been able to enjoy life in ways that they never even dreamed of because they thought that he was going to pass over 2 years ago. And yes, that got a lot of attention, and it was so exciting to see the awareness that was raised. And I think that so many of us that do drug repurposing, we know that drugs can be useful in new ways, and we know that humans are capable of discovering really interesting, clever ways for drugs to maybe be useful in a new disease area. But what's never been possible is to have a tool like artificial intelligence to look across all drugs and all diseases simultaneously. So not just, what's one drug for one disease, but what's the best drug for any disease. And that's what AI is allowing us to do.
That's a powerful story. And I think it shows what's possible when the right drug meets the right patient at the right time.
Exactly.
So repurposing drugs is far cheaper than developing a new one, but your work still requires real funding. What does the financial picture look like for Every Cure right now?
You're absolutely right. So it's far cheaper to repurpose a drug, but it's still quite expensive, and it's still not done because there's no upside. So no company will make money off finding a new use for an old medicine. So even if it's cheap to do something, you still don't do it if you're a drug company, if you're not going to be able to make any profit. And I don't agree that that's how it should be done. I wish it wasn't, but in our current system, that's just how it is. And so it sort of falls to nonprofits like ours. And we're really fortunate that ARPA-H, this brand new agency, which is really pushing forward moonshots for the American people, is funding what we're calling phase 2, which is laboratory studies and clinical trials of the top 10 drug repurposing opportunities for trials and the top 20 for laboratory studies, which is just transformative. It's $76 million over the next 3 to 4 years to do this work, which is the kind of investment that's needed to really transform drug repurposing and most importantly, to transform the lives of the patients that have those diseases that we're going to be studying. But even $76 million is still quite low relative to what it typically costs for even just one trial. A typical drug company will spend 75 to $100 million on one trial. And so that's going to require us to be really, really efficient with how we spend money. It's going to require us to work with great partners who actually donate their services, CROs and academic groups that maybe charge cost to us, because 10 trials for about $70 million is going to be very difficult. It's going to require partnership. It's also going to require us to pick repurposing opportunities that we know we can do for that sort of a budget range, the $5 to $7 million range, as opposed to others that would cost more, unless there's funding partners that can come to the table with us and say, okay, let's actually do that losartan pancreatic cancer trial that might cost $25 million. We can put 5 towards, but maybe there's a group that wants to put the other 20 towards it. And so these are the kinds of things that we're going to be laser focused on these next couple of years.
Thanks for being so candid about that. I think it really helps put your work into perspective for us. And for those listening who want to follow along or support what you're building, where can they learn more about Everycure?
You can go to everycure.org to learn about the work we're doing, to learn about our pipeline. We've got 10 active drug repurposing programs that range from the rarest disease I've ever heard of called Bachman-Bupp syndrome that's been described in 20 kids ever, to the most common cancer of women, breast cancer, that we're working on. And so really a broad range of diseases across the 10. As you mentioned earlier, we review 1,000 ideas a month. We add 1 to 2 every quarter. So that number of programs is going to keep growing. So you can check out what we're doing there. You can also donate at everycure.org/donate on our website. And really importantly, you can also help us in 2 more ways. One is to help to raise awareness about the messages we're sharing. Sometimes repurposing, the bottleneck and the hurdle is just awareness. And so you can help us to spread our social media posts about drugs that can be useful in new ways. And then also, a lot of us have actually received drugs off-label for diseases they weren't intended for. Maybe your doctor decided to sort of pioneer that they might try a drug in a way that it wasn't intended, and maybe it's really helped you, or maybe it hasn't helped you. Letting us know about that is really important. We search medical records, we search through a variety of data sources to find repurposing ideas, but just hearing directly from a patient that they have this one condition, they got this drug and it helped them, for us, that's interesting. And so you can do that at everycure.org/ideas, and we'll see what our AI platform is saying about that repurposing idea, but we also will look into it much further.
That's awesome. And we will be sure to share those links out in our show notes. So staying with that idea of kind of closing gaps, because that's something we care a lot about at Elsevier as well, is there a topic or an area you think we should create a video about to help fill an important knowledge gap?
Yeah, I think that there's a big knowledge gap around drug repurposing, off-label drug use, the role of the FDA. I think it'd be interesting for some of the listeners, particularly that are part of their medical training. A lot of times folks in the medical community think that the FDA's responsibility is to determine what drugs work for what diseases. That's sort of one mental model. But actually, the FDA will tell you that they don't see that as their job at all. They see their primary job as actually being regulating what drugs should be on the market and what diseases drug companies are allowed to market those drugs for. And those are 2 really important roles for the FDA, but they're not exactly what drugs work for what diseases. So there's a discrepancy between what FDA sees as its primary role and what a lot of folks in the medical community sees as the role of the FDA. So that means that there are drugs that are not FDA approved for a use, but they clearly work for that disease. The problem is that if that drug is generic, there's no incentive for that drug company to submit to the FDA to say, hey, will you update the label so now this drug works for this disease? And in fact, because there's no incentive, it's never been done. Drugs that are generic do not have their label changed. Even though medical science discovers new uses for medicines all the time, the labels don't change. So the FDA label says one thing, and what we know works is a completely different set of things. And so I think that is a big knowledge gap. I think that when you realize that the FDA label is intended to determine what should be on the market and what it should be marketed for, and not necessarily what that drug is effective for, it helps you to realize how important it is as a medical professional to think creatively about the role of that drug for the patient in front of you, and that you might actually be able to utilize a medicine that wasn't intended for that disease in an off-label way. And then it's really important when you realize that 20 to 30% of prescriptions every day are off-label. So every doctor listening to this is prescribing drugs off-label, but sometimes it's for things like prednisone for a cough. And you just assume that, everyone you get a prednisone for upper respiratory tract infections, but that's not actually on the label, right? And so we do a lot of sort of quote unquote obvious off-label prescribing all the time. This more pioneering sort of novel off-label prescribing, of course, happens less frequently, but it's along a spectrum. And at the end of the day, if there's biological value, if the drug can be reimbursed, and if it's going to help the patient, then doctors make these kinds of decisions all the time.
Those are great knowledge gap ideas. We will certainly pass those along to our team. So talked a little bit about our audience, and I want to ask you, for our audience of medical learners and early career professionals, what lessons from your journey would you want them to carry with them?
Sure. Let's see. A few things immediately come to mind. The first is that I wish I never got Castleman disease, but getting Castleman disease gave me this incredible clarity of purpose where I knew exactly how I wanted to spend my time. I still know how I want to spend my time. I know what I want to do. I know what I don't want to do. And I have something that I'm really chasing after. It gives me focus and clarity. And so I think for anyone who's going into any healthcare profession, being able to sort of find that thing that gives you the purpose, the clarity, the drive, is there a disease? Is there a drug? Is there a field of medicine? Is there a therapy technique? Like, is there something, and find it and chase after it? I think that in healthcare, especially as you're growing your career, oftentimes we sort of hesitate to dive all in on any one thing because you're in your training and you want to be exposed to a lot of things. But I'm of the mindset that diving into things is a great, great thing. It doesn't mean that's going to be the thing you dive into and you work on the rest of your life, but you learn how to dive deeply. You learn how to chase after things. And so I would just encourage anyone who's in the middle of training, if you find something that sparks your interest, chase after it, 100 miles per hour. You might run in the wrong direction. You may not use this particular skill that you develop in the future, but you'll learn how to learn. You'll learn how to chase after something, which for me, because I learned how to chase after the challenge of college student grief, and then I learned how to chase after, obviously, my potential and desire to go into medicine, that helped me to chase after Castleman disease, which then helped me and is helping me to chase after drug repurposing. So chasing after things, I think, is important, and you learn a lot. I think I'd also encourage those in training to recognize that sometimes solutions are hiding in plain sight. And we just sort of assume that if they haven't discovered something, like this sort of like amorphous they out there haven't figured it out, then it must not be the case. And if this drug worked for this disease, they would have figured it out by now. But I think it's important to realize that they is actually just a collection of a bunch of us's, and that none of us have the solution to everything. We're all just trying our best, and we miss things all the time. And so I think that sort of humble approach to medicine is really important, to recognize that there's actually a lot of things that we miss, and there's a lot of opportunities to help people. The upside of realizing that we're not all knowing is that means that there's a lot of opportunities to uncover things that those of us who are not all knowing have not figured out. And then I think maybe the last thing I'd say is that in medicine, there are a lot of conflicting stressors and values and preferences and things that pull you in a lot of directions. And if you can just use patient impact as your North Star, that will help so much. I talked about the challenges we're facing, prioritizing this drug for this disease or that drug for that disease, and patient impact serves as our North Star, which I don't think you can really go wrong if that's your guiding principle.
Thank you for sharing that advice. I think a lot of people listening will really take that advice to heart. Before we wrap up today's episode, is there anything we didn't cover that maybe we should have?
I think the only other thing that I'd say is that, the advice I just gave was really for healthcare professionals, but I think there's some things that just, are much more broad than just those of us that are going into healthcare that I think are worth pointing out. And one of them is just around how amazing it is that we get to wake up every day and we are here. And, I think it's so easy for us to get wrapped up in the day to day, but I've been describing this concept of overtime where, basically when I woke up from nearly dying the first time, I realized I was in overtime, but now I nearly died 5 times from my disease. So I'm in my 5th overtime. And for me, that's given me clarity. It's given me purpose. But I've just been reflecting a lot and talking with friends about the fact, I woke up those 5 times and couldn't believe I was here. And I had euphoria and gratitude and just desire to push things forward. But I should probably feel that way every morning I woke up. We probably should all just feel that way every morning we wake up, right? It's like we should feel euphoric. We should feel gratitude. We should feel clarity of purpose, because there are no days that are guaranteed. And I know that feels like a cliche, but it's just so true. And so, yeah, I think that my last thing is just to encourage us all to live with this overtime mindset of like, let's be grateful. Let's be excited. Let's solve the problems that are in front of us, because gosh, there are just so many problems.
That's a great way to close out the show, living with that overtime mentality. Thank you so much for being with us and for the incredible work you guys are doing at Every Cure.
Thanks so much, Lindsey.
And that brings us to a close on this anniversary episode of Raise the Line. Our thanks to Dr. Fajgenbaum for sharing the remarkable progress of Every Cure. His work reflects the very mission of the Raise the Line podcast in strengthening health and healthcare for all. And fittingly, it also ties into Elsevier's Year of the Zebra initiative. It's a powerful reminder of why rare disease awareness and innovation matter so much. I'm Lindsey Smith. Thanks for checking out today's show. Remember to do your part to raise the line and strengthen the healthcare system. We're all in this together.
If you like this podcast, please share it on your social channels. You can also subscribe to the series and check out all of our episodes at osmosis.org/raisethelinepodcast.